Got it. All right. So, hello everybody. Happy Wednesday. Today is October 13th, and this is Baltimore Racial Justice Action's 13th of the month event titled Black Respectability Politics. Next slide. So, just to kind of get started before we jump to the conversation, make sure you get a beverage or a snack. If you have a laptop and you're watching it there, make sure it's charged up and that your charger is close by. Pen and paper in case we do some journaling or you want to write some notes. Set aside anything that might distract you, and please make sure you're set. Once again, you're muting yourself unless panelists ask you to unmute. Video on is encouraged, but you don't actually have to. It's not required. Next slide, please. So this is just some information about Baltimore Racial Justice Action on social media. Please make sure that you are following us on Twitter, on Instagram, on YouTube, and on Facebook. Our YouTube channel, after we do these actual 13th of the month events, we share that there in case you want to share what you've learned or to share the piece with anybody else afterwards. So make sure you follow us to learn more about our organization and upcoming events. So a little bit about us. So Baltimore Racial Justice Action, we are a network of Maryland individuals committed to social transformation with an emphasis on racial equity. We were founded in 2003 and we are a fusion partnership. We are part of Fusion Partnerships. We are a nonprofit organization. Next slide. And the work that we do, we offer public consultations with organizations, and we do free monthly dialogues like the 13th event like you're at today. And we also do public workshops and consultations. It's important to remember that we are a small but mighty organization. So making sure that you go to the next slide actually, that if you would like to donate to continue these events and this work, please make sure you go to bemoreantiracist.com/donate. It can be small, large, even better, but we are always looking for support so we can continue to do this awesome work. Next slide. So before we begin, we'll just kind of give some information. Given the historic and violent nature of racism in this country and how it's been perpetrated on Black and non-Black people of color, an examination of history will be challenging. And so because of this, Baltimore Racial Justice Action provides this content warning at the beginning of our workshops and public offerings. Because of the US history of violence against Black and non-Black people of color, these conversations might surface for you moments of discomfort, pain, and struggle. And you are encouraged to take care of yourself during this time in the ways that do not disrupt this work or these sessions for others. Please make sure to take a moment and access whether you are emotionally ready to participate at this time. All right. So we are going to get started. I'm going to throw it on over to Erica and Anthony, and you all have the floor.
Oh, thank you. Anthony, are you going to start us off or am I starting us off?
Great. I was just going to say, hey, everybody, my name is Anthony. I'll have you do the first slide, Erica.
Hi, everyone. I'm Erica Taylor, a member of Baltimore Racial Justice Action. And today our focus will be on identifying Black respectability politics, examining the depth and interconnectedness to oppressive systems that we want to deconstruct and disrupt, reflect on our complicitness in and how the tool of Black respectability politics is wielded, and actions to require that require us to move differently, and also in assessing the utility of Black respectability politics as a tool. Next slide, please.
So I'll do this one.
Okay.
So we are asking, as was said earlier, for you to please grab some pen and paper for you to not only journal, but to write down some of the rich questions that you can have for our discussion at the end. We're mostly going to ask you to hold those questions so we can get through many of our slides. And we don't want you to lose those questions. So please go ahead, grab your pen and your paper, have that close by. And we wanted to spend a little bit of time in doing some grounding and expectation setting. While we're examining and critiquing the decisions and choices that impact the lives of Black people, the critique isn't to demonize past decisions or current actions. Instead, we are understanding how these decisions align with strategies required for survival and how those survival tactics are still used today. Past and present Black respectability politics create hostility and violence between and against Black people. And when Erica and I planned this, we were thinking about our ancestors. We were thinking about the hurtful, the traumatic, and the life-changing decisions that they had to make. And these decisions weren't the easiest, and those decisions might be dated. But in our time today, we want to extend grace, and we want to think about those who sacrificed before us. So take a few moments to take some breaths, breathing in that grace and honoring that sacrifice. Thanks.
Ashe.
So today's topic is Black respectability politics. And per usual, our audience is multiracial, as usually always for our 13th of the month events. So there will be times that we are specifically talking about Black respectability politics and talking about relationships, conversations, interaction with Black people. And there's going to be points in the conversation in which we are specifically talking to non-Black people or to white people about their role in Black respectability politics. Our 13 events are never designed for folks to sit on the sideline and observe. So there is going to be a point where we're going to ask you to participate by responding to some questions, responding into the large group conversation, not to just spectate and take things in, but be prepared to be engaged and be an active participant in tonight's event. Also wanted to lift that we are not experts, that I can promise that everyone in this room has dabbled in or upheld respectability politics in some way, and that we will be drawing from all of our experiences while also laying a historical framework and anti-racist, anti-oppression lens on these conversations. And we hope that this will expose the insidious ways white culture is under our skin. Next slide.
All righty, so I guess we're just going to jump right on in. And part of this conversation comes about from, I think, Anthony, you said there was a movie coming out soon, right? That prompted like this topic. Can you remind me of the movie?
So we were also talking about the connection with this and Passing, which is the movie coming out soon for Netflix.
And so part of that means that like there is opportunity to explore the ways and the tools that Black community or Black members in the community have used to survive and assert humanity in the face of white supremacy. And so today we want to just examine the origins briefly, talk about the utility and the manifestations of respectability politics throughout the ages, and then get into some questions about like, how complicit are we in this? Is there still utility in using it? How do we use it to police each other, etc.? So we have, let's go to the next slide. We have a working definition for this session. And I think we welcome, when we get to the question and answer part, some feedback on this definition about what resonates with it, what may not resonate with it, what you may not resonate with, rather, and then how it can be improved. So for the purposes of this session, we're defining it, Black respectability, as a set of adopted beliefs and behaviors that signal proximity to white social norms, originating out of a desire to assert shared humanity in a country that deemed Blacks inferiors, subhuman, and 3/5 of a person. These beliefs and behaviors were performative to a white gaze and created strata enforced by color and class within Black communities. Yielded initially as a tool to gain access to resources and position, Black respectability politics devolved into a mechanism for Blacks policing other Blacks. Black respectability politics offers little to no criticism of white supremacy. Next slide. So where do we start with this? And I was reviewing some work that was done by William Gatewood in a book called The Aristocrats of Color, which examines the Black elite from 1880 to 1920. Now, first, let me start by saying the term Black respectability politics comes from Evelyn Higginbotham's book. There's a resource later, and I'm blanking on it right now, but at the research page, we'll be sure to give you the title of it, that looks at Black churches during the same time period. And she talks about the ways that people have had to move in society just to stay safe, right? And so we think about the origins of that, and let's say 1873, Harper's Ferry had like this caricature, or Harper's Weekly, not Harper's Ferry, a caricature in the magazine that had upper class Blacks, and they were demeaning them and you know, the usual language around coonish and not being able to live up to the standards of white society despite the fact of having money. But this was like a pivotal time that actually signaled that there is a small but present Black elite. And that Black elite existed before the Civil War. Probably a combination of people who were manumitted by their fathers or in wills, and were able to just stay free in a relative way throughout that. And then we move up to Reconstruction, where we have our first Black senators. You know, the Civil War has gone on, and the strata is widened in the Black community, because the freed Blacks want to stay separate from the enslaved Blacks. And then remember that the origins of this was to gain more access to resources by emulating white culture and white societal norms. And with that at threat, by the masses of people being emancipated, there was some that went toward it, and in the terms of racial uplift and organizing for that end. And there were others that wanted to create strata that essentially created a blue veins society, and other vestiges of that, like paper bag tests that we've heard of before in the past. Next comes Jim Crow, which, even despite all of the terms to all the attempts to emulate white society, being Black is criminalized. You have the Black codes, where gathering, you have to step off the street or the sidewalk, and those kinds of things. And then you have the mass exodus from the South to northern places for Blacks to face a new, a different type of racism and interaction with white society. And then we have the civil rights movements, where we have a fight against, a backlash towards these accepted norms, or or essentially a statement saying, we are human. The only thing that divides us is color. And we have shown you this through all the things that we've done, the accomplishments we've made, and we still have not even been given equal human rights. We move further on to Black power. People are just like, I am not conking this hair any longer. I'm going to be free. I'm going to say it loud and proud, Black is beautiful, and assert Black power and the right to it. And so when we get to the discussion, I'm only going to take you a little bit up to let's go a little bit into the 70s with this, I think, in terms of Black power. But then comes the 80s, and we have the Cosby Show, and simultaneously having like the epitome of what Black middle class is supposed to look like, and popular culture, while simultaneously the shrinking of the Black middle class and widening gaps of in terms of poverty for Black families. And then we have the 90s, where Oprah shows up, and she is Miss Everything, you know, she's the picturesque example of what that can mean. And then we have, like, Anthony reminded me of this morning, we have the Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, which literally in front of our eyes from like 8 to 8:30, we see the conflict between the Black elite and the lower class Black coming together as he tries to be accepted and teach while being trained and groomed for an elite society with his uncle Phil, who was a judge in California in Bel Air. And then we can go to the next slide and talk about some other things. I think that part of the crux of the issue that I'm really excited to get to the discussion about is how race, class, and status, status representing the fact that you didn't always have to have money to have status, and is largely in part of the colorism aspect that is infused into this discussion. When we talk about the original talks of the Black 400 or the upper 10s in the charm circle, they were also lighter. And then we get into passing, and as Anthony mentioned, there's a movie coming out soon about that. But this is what we're looking at here. And so its status was afforded by color, was afforded by position, but at the same time, being Black in America and the problems therein. As we look at this, we see like different throughout the time periods that I talked about in the last slide, we see like how these things have come up. So again, we have the free versus the enslaved, and after Reconstruction, the old families versus the new families. And we have some of that right here. I mean, even in the books that Higginbotham and Gatewood talk about, there are some Baltimore families that emanate from this. Remember that Baltimore had the largest population of free Blacks pre-Civil War. And so the members of that community here and in DC make up a lot of the charm circle of sorts. And there are two ways that folks can go. So there are folks who went into passing for protection, and there are folks who felt this sense towards noblesse oblige, which is essentially this opportunity and compulsion to help lift people up. And so that's where we get lots of the conversation around racial uplift, which in and of itself doesn't acknowledge the pathology of living in America, a white supremacist country. It places the pathology on helping people, lifting people up from the dredges, instead of criticizing the system that created those dredges or those inequities and oppression in the first place. After that, we have growing integration and more separation from between like the Black classes, more gradations across that, growing Black and middle upper class. And then Skip Gates comes out with, I think this was in the 90s, I believe, Two Nations of Black America, where a statesman about Julian Bond says, the only thing between me, speaking about a guy who was in the shadows that they do to mask someone's appearance, the only thing that's combining or that connects me and him, this person in a sweatshirt, is the color, the kente cloth color cummerbund, something to that effect. And so really trying to make the argument that race is a small portion of the issue when it's really class. It didn't catch on, and I think that analysis is very flawed to begin with. But this is what was presented forth by Skip Bates back in the day. And jump ahead to most recently thinking about how Black reality TV allows us a little bit of schadenfreude, where we watch folks who are nouveau riche in situations where we're expecting bad things to happen or drama to ensue. And that's a form of entertainment. And what that gives us is a bit of comfort knowing that, well, you know, there's a separation here. I would not have acted like that on national television. And that's what the ratings are for, right? That's how we get it. And so even in our entertainment, we're imbued with these ideas and these remnants of the origins and continued policing of each other with regard to Black respectability politics. And always forgetting that it was initially a tool to assert our shared humanity. Next slide, please. Anthony, I think this is you.
Okay, so now we're going to talk a little bit about that strategy and also holding history, right? And so this person probably looks familiar to most of you. You can click the next one, Dana. That is Rosa Parks. And could you click again? This is Claudette Colvin. All right. There is a reason why you know Rosa Parks and probably not Claudette Colvin, or like maybe I've heard of her or I'm not so familiar with her, right? So we all know that Rosa Parks, and all learned in history at some point, whether I was in school, outside, have the storybooks that have the very simplified version that, you know, Rosa Parks decided to sit on the bus one day and she was just too tired and didn't want to give up her seat, right? This very simplified without talking about the actual strategy that Rosa Parks was doing. That the whole act was strategic, right? Claudette Colvin did the very same thing. Claudette Colvin also sat down on the bus and refused to give up her seat. This was in the same city. This was the same bus system. But when we get into thinking about the strategy and the respectability politics, it starts to make a little bit more sense why we know Rosa Parks and not Claudette Colvin. Can you click on the next one, Dana? Claudette was a teenager at the time that she was arrested, and NAACP members thought it would not be a good idea to have a teenager be the face of the movement. They very much wanted an adult. They wanted somebody that was seasoned, to be the face of this specific movement, or to be part of the strategy to be arrested. Shortly after she was arrested, she got pregnant. Having someone be in the front line or have their face out and be pregnant in teenage pregnancy did not meet some of the tenets of Black respectability politics. And then she also says in a NPR interview that she also thinks that her being a dark-skinned woman had something to do with her not being the face or not being supported by the NAACP in the way that Rosa Parks was. You can click again, Dana. In this very interview, when they ask, why do you think Rosa Parks, they asked Claudette and they asked other people that were close to her and other people that were doing organizing work, why do you think that Rosa Parks was elevated during this time? Well, many people don't know that she was the secretary of the NAACP, of the NAACP chapter. She was a seamstress. She was a quote unquote professional. They talk about her being light skinned and her hair texture and her personality being docile and her being gentle and be palatable to white people, right? All of these strategies that are giving in that this is the person that we want to be the face, this is who we want to see because they meet these standards, they meet the respectability politics. And that the stories and the experience from the people that do not are invisibilized or forgotten. Anything before I move to the next slide, Erica? Okay, next one, Dana. Okay, so even when respectability politics, even when we elevate and have a mainstream story about a Black person who has been murdered, that's been the Trayvon Martins, the Freddie Gays, the Breonna Taylors, Sandra Bland's, George Floyd. These are all people's names that we've heard, right? And have had mass support around. But respectability politics makes us focus on the behavior of the Black people that were murdered or harassed or abused, right? Mm-hmm. And so I don't know how many times this happens, and I hear specifically Black people will say, oh, wait, before we move to judgment, let's find out what they did. But at the same time, we can have the conversation and say that nobody, and same person will agree that nobody deserved to die because they had a hoodie on, because they used did or did not use a counterfeit bill. So why do we apply so much pressure into what the behavior of the person is? And that is what Black respectability politics is weighted on, is that your behavior determines your lifespan, your success, your opportunities, all of that. And if you are not up to code and respecting Black respectability politics, not only could that be your life as a survival tactic, but that also interferes with who or the ways that other people will support, gather, organize around the abuse, the harassment, or your murder.
And let's not forget that this is about Black respectability politics at its core. It's about white comfort. And how we show up in ways that are threatening to idealize ways of like how whites need to be approached, should be approached with deference and in a submissive manner. And so to that end, the wrath is predicated on how you did not do your due diligence to make sure you were inside the code that we built to keep you safe.
And the one that, I mean, all of them are atrocious, but the one that really stands out to me the most in this is for Breonna Taylor, right? At the time of the pandemic in which we were saying that we need to honor our frontline workers, that they are priority, and she is an EMT. And then all of that got switched on. Well, her boyfriend was there, right? And it got moved by the narrative. That's why you got to watch the company that you keep, right? And so the way that we will go and extend and go out of our way to find something to fixate on instead of focus and analyzing on the system that failed and murdered the people, the Black people that we're talking about or discussing. Our next slide. So let's have fun in the chat. In your chat, I want you to put a number of how many people that you recognize. How many of these people do you recognize? Let's be honest. If it's 0, put 0. If it's 5, let's do 5. 1, 2, 3.
Zero, two, 2, 3.
Okay, 4. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So could you click again, Dana? So respectability politics also invisibilizes and ignores the Black lives that are lost, that don't meet the standards, as I had said earlier. Roxanne Moore that you see here, Tony McDade that you see right here, right beside Roxanne, you can click again, Dana. Trans women and trans men that were murdered. Of course, that does not fit the narrative or fit or meet Black respectability politics. And I'll talk a little bit more about some pillars into this. Ma'Khia Bryant, who was, I believe, 12 years old when she was murdered and in foster care. I'll get into these stories some more. Corinne Gaines, who actually was living in Baltimore County at the time that she was murdered. And then we have Alvin Motley Jr. Can you click again, Dana? And so as I was looking and doing lots of research, there were like these 4 tenets that people were focusing on in kind of different ways that really hold up Black respectability politics. The first one I'm gonna talk about is the hypersexuality. That most of the time the hypersexuality piece is what's used on Black women, Black queer people, right? That they are being promiscuous and they are living outside or are being over-sexual, or their sexuality is misplaced. And that makes it all right for us to not be infuriated or be enraged by the injustice and the trauma that they are experiencing, right? So those being the very prevalent in both Roxanne Moore and Tony McDade. When I look at Ma'Khia Bryant and the pillar of family dysfunction and being one of these tenets, she was in foster care at the time. It was also reported that she had had lots of trouble with her foster parents and that there were challenges, mental health challenges that she had. That's another thing that is not something that we usually gather and support around in Black respectability politics. Is that we are all able-bodied, like there's an ableism that comes with that we don't support. And we've seen multiple cases in which there were mental support that should have been supported by police officers or by whatever that community service should have been, and then that life was ended. And we took it as they made the wrong decision, and we're not having the different conversation that we need to have about mental health. Similar thing for Corinne Gaines. She talks about, and it's reported, and yeah, it's on record that she felt that she was being harassed by police, and there are multiple accounts of that. And so when they actually came to her house and did not want to let police in, they're like, how would you not cooperate with police? Mm-hmm. That was not a very sound or a very sane thing to do, right? And then again, makes her decision, because she did not honor respectability politics, to make her be quote unquote disposable, and for us not to gather and rally around her and actually examine. And then the last one we have here is Alvin Mootley Jr., who was murdered in his car for playing loud music. Black people playing loud music in their car, a lot of times is associated with criminality. Must be a thug, must be up to trouble. I'm gonna stop right there, Erica.
And I think that what one of the things we're trying to capture in the definition is that there is little criticism of white supremacy, Black respectability product, and if it in politics, and if it does criticize white supremacy, it's secondary. So in hypersexuality, this idea of hypersexuality and this idea of being chaste so that we can eschew like unwanted advances or whatever, we are not simultaneously criticizing the oppressive nature of Christianity and churches and how they support and then victimize those who are victims, or not victimized, but further oppress or further victimize those who have been targeted in those kinds of ways for sexual acts, or like rape or abuse. And then simultaneously, we even have now where folks are being taken away, like we have this medical kidnapping that's happening. And the thing that's coming up now, because is there's very little criticism of CPS.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's growing. I mean, we can think about what Tierney did, and others who've talked about it, like Dorothy Roberts. But the first instinct is to criticize the child here, and not the system that is predicated on the use of Black and brown children as commodities.
Mm-hmm.
Simultaneously, we talk about, when you talk about Corinne Gaines and anti-intellectualism, it harkens back to ideas about like, what is it that we're defining as sane? We had one of our Ray Winbush talks about this in his talks about the DSM and how that is racism, the assignment. We see that even trying to get away from oppressive forces was considered insanity for slaves to run away. It was a form of insanity. And so it's how that is used, that's the foundation of what we call mental health and how it's used against. And we're not criticizing that if she doesn't want certain kinds of oppressive forces in her house, that those same oppressive forces cannot gain entry and then be held, be found not guilty in taking her life.
Thanks. And we're gonna practice on these tenets again at another slide. Before right now, could you click to the next one, Dana? So we're going to talk about how Black respectability politics shows up in some different lanes. And we're going to start, since we're already in organizing and politics there. You can click again, Dana. In protests and organizing, that is a conversation that comes up all the time. Why are people being violent? We should be non-violent. The language that we use around it. Was a protest? Was it a rebellion? Was it a riot? Narratives of why are they in the street acting like that, acting like hoodlums. So a point that I want to talk about and focus on, because a lot of times we talk about the today, I don't want to put this all as Black Lives Matter, but like protests that have been happening in recent years, and then what is compared to the civil rights movement. I chose these particular pictures right here because also one thing that is a myth that happens is that like the people today protesting are being violent, as if that was not also happening back in the 60s and in the 70s. But that this part of being nonviolent was a strategy. And this was happening in a time period where people were just starting to get televisions in their household. A lot of times people were getting their news from the radio. And so activists were using the strategy that they want white America to see us protesting in the streets, but we want them to see us as human, but also as professionals, as the doctors, as the preachers, as the lawyers, right? There's been so much narrative of us being the thugs or being vicious. We want them to see us as upstanding citizens, and see upstanding citizens being hosed and being dragged and being busted over the head with billy clubs, right? That was very much a strategy. No one says that has to be the way. And that is something that is still carried into today, that people want to go ahead and dismantle and dispower all of the activism that's happening today, because it's not done the exact same way as it was in the civil rights movement. Next slide. Next, I guess, click. Also, about the attire that's worn when you protest, I had talked about that. Let's click to the next one. What's different now is the faces that back then, there were particular faces that you saw that were in the front of the civil rights movement. So a lot of times women, gay men, gay women, you would not see as the face of the movement or on the in front of the camera or doing the interviews, right? But we know that the Fannie Lee Claimers, we know now that the Bayard Rustins did not get the light, the credibility, the attention that they should have, but was also doing the very hard work that their lives were also on the line. But because it was focused on straight cis men, mostly preachers, it was not, we did not focus or give the credibility, the dude work that those elders did before us. Our next slide. I'm gonna click. And this one, we talk about the difference in the leadership structure. Black Lives Matter movement founders specifically talked about not having a one person as the face of the movement, which is often a critique, is that what are they doing right now? They don't even have a leader. It is very unorganized. And it talked about how if you have a person that is a leader that speaks for the entire group, as we saw with Malcolm X and Martin Luther King, if they are assassinated, then that could potentially take power away from the movement, right? And so this is conversations that Black people are constantly having and critiquing of today, and saying that I can't support or get behind it because it does not have a leader, because there is not a face that is leading the group, instead of the more collaborative or our group power that Black Lives Matter movement has. And then our last one. So the other thing that respectability politics does in organizing in politics is it prioritizes the symbolism instead of the substance. And so when Anita Hill came out and said that, came out and talked about her harassment from Clarence Thomas, before that, there are many Black people that were like, we are not feeling him, right? Mm-hmm. But because at the time Thurgood Marshall was stepping down and Black people wanted to continue that legacy and have another Black person on the Supreme Court, what he wanted, what he was representing was more important, right? And so it's more important that we have a Black person there, and how dare her try to interrupt this new legacy, right? And so in a lot of conversations, it wasn't even about, is she telling the truth or is she not? But how dare she interrupt this Black excellence, this new legacy that we are trying to build, right? Mm-hmm. And so it keeps us in this mindset where we don't critique, where we don't analyze, and we just say Black representation, we have to say yes, we have to back it up. You're going to say something, Erica?
I was going to say something. I mean, let's not forget that she didn't like willy-nilly volunteer. She was drug out. Her claims against him preceded the hearings to get his confirmation in the Senate. They had to drag her out, ruin her reputation. I mean, like, and even as I say that, like, and we'll continue to do this as we have the conversation, figure out what does that mean to ruin someone's reputation? What, you know, what does that mean? Like, what more does that take away from her? But I definitely think that we made a alternate persona that wasn't even Anita Hill to justify not liking her because she was in the face of someone who ain't never shown up for us yet.
Yes. We have Kamala Harris, same type of conversation. Oh, it will be our first Black vice president. Yeah, I felt very uncomfortable about what her past experience is, but I'm gonna discount that because I really want to see a Black vice president, right? Same with Barack Obama, conversations of Black people being like, we can't critique Barack Obama, he's the first Black president. And I'll get more on talking about some of that soon. But yeah, again, on the substance versus symbolism versus the substance on that part. Anything else before we go to the next slide, Erica?
I like that this symbolism versus the substance. I like
I
that.
think that I want to credit Adar for that, maybe, or maybe I think that's one of the first people that I heard say that. So,
Okay. Well, credits to you, Adar.
yes.
Next slide.
Okay. So, it's not tough love, it's respectability politics at work. And so oftentimes we are told that, oh, we got to be tough and we got to say it the way that it is. And that's some internalized oppression things that we can get into in a different topic. But a lot of times it's respectability politics at work. So the first one that we have is Charles Barkley here, and said that I've always said as Black people, if you want respect, you got to give respect to each other, and you can't demand respect from white people and the cops if you don't respect each other. This was after, I'm not sure if this was 2018 or if this was 2020, but it was after some uprisings when somebody decided to ask him a question and he decided to open his mouth and give those comments. Next one. Now, this one I believe was definitely last year, and this is Trina, who is a female rapper, who says, keep everybody off the street, those animals off the street, acting like they escaped from the zoo, lock them up at 5 p.m. so the streets can be nice and clean. And this was last year after George Floyd and Breonna Taylor's murder, when people were protesting nationally. Our next one, very familiar, Bill Cosby. So this is, Bill Cosby has had lots of comments. I decided to choose this specific one. 5 or 6 different children from 8 or 10 different husbands or whatever. Pretty soon they're going to have DNA cards so you can tell who you're making love to. This is Bill Cosby on one of his rants about single women, not married, with multiple kids or multiple baby fathers. There is I'm not sure if this is all in the same one, but there is the historical pound cake conversation where he goes on lots of these rants upholding Black respectability politics. I almost want to dub him the king of Black respectability politics. Our next one. Okay, and Barack Obama said that we're going to have to parent better and turn off the television and set up and put the video games away and instill a sense of excellence in our children. That's going to take some time. Different comment, brothers, pull up your pants. Different one, make them do their homework under a watchful eye and fix them nutritious breakfast instead of slapping some cold Popeye's chicken on the plate. So this is where I was saying earlier, these comments were, maybe one of them I'd heard before, but in this research, I was like, wow, I had not heard these, right? And there's not much critique on this, right? Because he is Barack Obama, the first Black president.
And who did he inherit that sentiment from?
Say that again, sorry.
I just offered, who did he inherit that sentiment from about
right.
Blacks? Like, where did he inherit that from?
Yes, had to follow that entire formula in order to get to the seat that he was at, right? And so when we go and think about our tenets again, can you click again, Dana? Criminality, and talking about who is it, they're in the streets, they are being quote unquote animals, destroying things, looting things. The focus on criminality is one of the pillars of Black respectability politics. For Bill Cosby, the hypersexuality, there's other things that he has talked about that upholds it, but the hypersexuality and talking about women.
Ironic, no?
One. Go ahead.
Ironic, no?
Yeah, very. Can you click? Okay. Family dysfunction, right? That when Barack Obama was making these comments, I think at least 2 or if not all of these comments were made in a Black church, right? And so specifically talking about, and I think that these were made on Father's Day. So instead of on Father's Day in a Black church talking and celebrating Black fathers, to have such a focus on absent fathers or what fathers are not doing as if they are not present in households at all, Very interesting. And our next one, can you click again, Dana? And then the anti-intellectualism, right? Is that we need parents to do better and think better because they're making bad choices because they're not intelligent enough to make the smart ones. So I need to make this comment and bestow this wisdom upon them. And then our next one. And so this is a quote that I like from Dr. Michael Eric Dyson, that it is based in the belief that good behavior and stern chiding will cure Black ills and uplift Black people and convince Black people that we are human and worthy of respect.
Mhm.
And so something else that I want to name in this too that is important is location. Is that we as Black people have had a lot of these conversations. It's very different when you're having them at the kitchen table, at the family reunion, in the church basement. But when it is on a mainstream platform, or it is, like my grandmother would say, with mixed company, then it definitely changes the conversation. It changes the impact. It changes the direction that it goes in. And when that is done, when Black people do that on a main stage, there is a specific whistle that is being blown and strategy that is being used in that. Next one, Dana. Okay, so now we're talking about Black culture. As always, Black women are always being criticized for twerking and the way that they dance. In the picture right beside that, you may be able to see there is a woman who's taking a dollar bill and putting it in the fishnets. So this was back in 2016. I'm not sure if people remember, but this is a typical case of respectable versus ratchet. She was a chapter president for the NAACP. A photo was pictured of her in a strip club and went viral. How could she even be in a strip club? How could she be acting like that? That's not respectable at all. She shouldn't even be president anymore. Again, this hypersexuality part. Click again, please, Dana.
Well, not even that. It's about like a proximity too, like that not only are, it's like a better Black, right? You have to then separate from quote unquote the element and keep your distance. Thus you be like, cast among them as well.
There is that you have reached a certain level, so why would you ever go back to, which is assume that there is a downward staircase.
Yes.
Yeah, this is one of the great ones. They're standing in line to get some Jordans. Every time that this happens, media always is like, oh, look at all the Black people standing in line for the Jordans. Black people are always like, oh my gosh, you want to get some Jordans, but you can't afford this and that, and blah, 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 blah narrative. Click again, Dana. Most recently, I guess that was 1 or 2 years ago, that Popeyes came out with the chicken sandwich, and it was even worse, in my opinion. And Black people being like to other Black people, oh no, I would never stand in line for some fried chicken. But yeah, click again, Dana. White people are always going to stand in line for an Apple product. And it's not the same conversation. It's not the same conversation. And I'm saying this in both ways. It is not the same conversation that like white people are not talking about when white people do it the same way they are when they talk about Black people that stand in line for it is what they want or what they need. But also that Black people, that we critique ourselves so harshly when we do it. And those two comparisons, that like, there's a narrative of the like, how dare you spend all this money on some shoes, spend $200 or $300 on some shoes. And people say that like, oh, it's just because they're spending so much money on it. Well, they were standing in line for a $5 chicken sandwich and you still had a problem with that, right?
Right. Or a $900 iPhone.
Right? Can you click again, Dana? Like I had said before, Bill Cosby was one of the things pull your pants up. And it is something that we have endorsed with Black respectability politics on dress, as we see in like last year at, I believe it was Uzo, where there was like, we strictly enforce a dress code, right? So we see that at certain establishments that if you want to come in, it's targeted at Black people. You have to have, you can't be wearing baggy jeans, you can't be wearing these type of shoes, right? And then we as Black people say, oh yeah, we also endorse and support this because, I mean, and then institutions are like, because middle class Black America says that this is also not respectable, then we're able to uphold this. You're going to say something, Dana. I mean, Erica, sorry.
So I think that one of the things that concerns me
I'm gonna have
about
to finish that when we stand
the-
up. Or when I stand up.
someone's off mute. The one of the things that concerns me about that is when we think about the dress code, we're not, again, like you have this this comparison with Apple versus Popeye's chicken. We're not looking at appropriated hip hop culture dress and those people being barred from spaces.
Mhm.
I think it was one restaurant that was literally, as they were like telling folks that they couldn't come in because the kid had on tennis shoes, the mom was pointing to another white kid that had on tennis shoes that wasn't being asked to leave the restaurant from because of poor dress or not appropriate dress code.
Yep.
Dana? Yep.
Thank you. Of course, the talk, right, that when teenagers or Black teenagers get their license, to talk about what to do when you're pulled over by police, right? And that when you do not do that at any age, and you do not do the 10 and 2, the yes sir to the police officer, that a lot of times it is deemed that, like, well, you did the wrong thing. You didn't follow respectability politics correctly, even if that officer was out of line, right? Again, part of that is a strategy that we do that for us to be able to survive, but we also cannot discount the fear, the frustration, all the things that when we are the person, we talking about Black people, the person in the car feel, and may not be able to, even if our, we would like to, in hindsight, be able to say the yes sir, keep it 10 and 2 or whatever, that we are still murdered, abused, harassed for not making the perfect decision in a high stress situation.
I think the takeaway is that even following that does not keep us safe. And so why, again, about the utility of it, why fake the funk, right?
And
Why,
yeah,
why
and I
be
think
performative if it doesn't guarantee safety?
And I think Sandra Bland was a great example of that, right? And that, like, because she pushed back on officers, right, and was constantly asking questions and knew that she was being wrongfully arrested. And then later on, it was saying that she was not cooperative as part of the narrative for Sandra Bland, and it being justified of, well, it says death by suicide, but that's a different conversation. Next click. Yeah, speaking Ebonics, the entire African American vernacular English, that was in the, I believe, early 90s when the conversation about Ebonics came up. And it was meant to begin to bridge the gap between African American children who spoke a certain way at home and then moving over and being able to connect to what it is, the kings or queens English, right? And so that conversation was totally, that movement was totally cut off. And a lot of it from Black people who were like, no, we don't need a alternate English for them to be able to learn. Everybody should be able to speak this. There's so many narratives that went to Ebonics that pushed up against respectability politics that it was squashed quickly. And so people still leave to today and believe Ebonics was about having and moving away from the English language entirely, and for Black people having a different language than everyone else that was speaking in America, right? And so it's another thing that happens with Black respectability politics. It's cutting off the conversation and it perpetuates the false narratives, right? There's many teachers who talk about, we actually did a 13th event on it where a teacher was talking and she said, for me to tell my students that what they said is wrong is telling them that their mom is speaking wrong, that their mom is speaking incorrectly, or their dad. That's where they learned this from, right? So to be able to have language and say, I can meet and I hear how you talk at home, and this is how you will need to be able to talk in the workplace or outside of here, would be an important tool for our students. And that was what was trying to be achieved with Ebonics and African American vernacular English. Go ahead, Erica.
A couple of things. One, I think that the origins of Ebonics, or maybe not the origins of Ebonics, but I do recall loosely that there was some scholarship around the vestiges of African dialect, and it was an actual scholarship around how different types of people speak and how we've been able to maintain some of that even after being brought across in transatlantic slave, how we've been able to keep culture and how that resonates in the way we speak in comparative studies and stuff like that. So I think that there's an actual scholarship around speech patterns of people of African descent. But that kind of got waylaid by this here. But also the irony of this is also around, there is, listen to the average person who speaks English. The expectations are far above normal. I mean, no one, Queen's English crap, like looking at Webster's dictionary and having correct grammar. No one speaks like that. But the expectation is that we're so far removed from being able to be understood, which is the purpose of language, that it is directly connected to our subhuman nature or our inability, our pathology to do so.
And then I'll just go by this one quickly because I'm watching our time. Of course, again, what is purchased and what is spent money on rims or on grills, and putting Black people in a specific box or a specific class or being a type of Black person in Black culture, that goes against respectability politics. Let's go to our next slide. Okay, and so something that Erica and I talked about was, how do white people talk about respectability politics? And it's like, is it Black respectability politics? And then we came up with this white comfortability is probably more close to the way that it comes up. And so we're talking about the workplace with these. And so code switching is a common one. Black people cannot safely talk the same way that they can at home in the workplace or in white spaces, and still be given the same respect and credibility and everything in the workplace, in most workplaces. Tone policing is another one. Along with tone policing, also policing the body. Be like, oh my gosh, the Black person in the office is not smiling, they must be upset, right? You need to wear a smile on your face in the office at all times and have a very cool tone. Don't get too passionate, don't get too angry. The Crown Act, which was a law that was passed so Black people can wear their hair naturally. There are plenty of, Erica has talked about the graduating from college and then you decide to go ahead and perm your hair so you can get a job, to the TikToks that you see now that it's usually like a Black woman and she's like, here's how I look on my interview, and has her hair straightened, and then here's how I am on the first day of work because she has her hair natural. Our next one, Dana. The HBCU, if you attended the HBCU, how that shows up on the resume when you're going to a white institution, and also which HBCU that you went to. Next one. Black excellence. That we as Black people uphold Black excellence, and this is a mantra that is giving all the time, to strive for Black excellence, but also that white people often uphold it. We do workshops with people in the workplace, and we've heard from multiple people that like, hey, I got hired for the job, and then a few weeks after I started, they said that they kind of hired me because I reminded them of Barack Obama, right? And so there is a particular box or a monolith that they have, that they want you to be the exceptional or the exceptional Black person in the workplace. Your next one. And then again, it's masking in the workplace and not being able to be your full self and bring your full self. All right, and let's go ahead, Erica, before we go to our questions.
Well, I see the chat blowing up, and so I'm excited about the conversation that's ensuing. And just to mention that I remember seeing a meme, not a meme, Julia's going to have to correct me on what I saw. I saw a posting on TikTok or Instagram that was talking about people, even if you feel like a Black woman at work is giving you the business, she's still holding back 80% of what you would have gotten if you were not in that situation. So definitely like restraint and the absence of survival. And again, let's think about how this has to show up in a workplace to be able to get resources. Why do we go to work? Very few of us go to work for fun. It's about being able to get the things so that we can live comfortably or more comfortably and pay for a roof over our head, food for our children, or for ourselves. I mean, it's not even indicative of being a parent. And so I just wanted to bring that point up here. We can go to the questions now. Next slide. So we have questions that are divided in terms of affinity groups. And so for Black participants, what do you have to unlearn about Black respectability politics? Can you identify a function of respectability politics that you would like to stop upholding? And in what ways might it be difficult to uphold Black respectability politics while prioritizing your own self-care? Anthony, you want to do the other side?
Sure. For non-Black people of color and white participants, we're asking you, where do you see respectability politics playing a role in your life? What do you have to unlearn? And identify ways that you have required Black people to adhere to respectability politics to satisfy your level of comfort. So we're going to give about 2 or 3 minutes for you to journal on those questions, clear up some of the questions. Maybe you were scribbling down while we were talking. And then we are going to do a large group conversation. So we are going to turn off our video for like a minute or 2, and then we'll come right back.
I'm trying to catch up a little bit on the chat. Julia, Dana, do you have like the questions that popped out there mostly as well that are further up?
Hey, Erica. So there weren't not a lot of questions, but just a lot of comments and conversation happening in reactions to what was being discussed on the PowerPoint. So I'm going to go through and make sure there's no questions. And then, I mean, if you want me to bring up any kind of the topics that were coming up, we can do that.
Thanks.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so we are coming back. We are going to turn our videos on, and we ask that you do as well if you're able to, so we can kind of see each other while we're having this conversation, this large group conversation. So please keep yourself muted if you are not the person that is talking, but please turn on your video so we can see the other people that are in the Zoom meeting. And I guess, Dana, if you could put the questions in the chat and we could take down the slideshow so we could see each other better, that would be great.
I think I can assist with that too, Dana.
Okay. And for those of you, just a Zoom tip, if you're trying to figure out how to be able to see everyone, in the right corner or somewhere, there should be a view option, and you can click gallery to be able to see more faces if you want to do it that way, or you could do speaker to just focus on the person that is talking. So we will open the floor for you to just kind of like raise your hand if you have a question or a comment that you want to make from something that you wrote down from the Q&A. Susan, go ahead.
You're on mute, Susan.
I've been dealing with a really tough situation in that I take care of an 86-year-old friend who's in a nursing home. I'm her healthcare agent. And there's a privately paid companion who's African-American who I'm very uncomfortable with when the two of us are in the same room, even though we're both there for the well-being of my friend. And I'll use names just to make it easier. My friend is Helene, and the aide, we'll call her Karen. So she won't make eye contact with me. Karen will not make eye contact with me. And I feel insulted that she won't. She comes to Helene after a long day of work at another, at another job. So, I can appreciate the fact that she might be tired. But one time I said to her, Karen, I would appreciate it if you'd look at me when I talk to you. It makes me feel insulted that you don't look at me.
Susan,
And,
could you, Susan, for the sake of time, could you kind of summarize how this relates to Black respectability politics for us?
Well, I expect her to be civil.
Okay.
And she's not.
There's a lot there, Susan, because you want her to make you comfortable in the situation in a way you feel good with. And that's not actually what we're talking about here. And I think there's an opportunity to think about why you need her to make you feel comfortable when you're both there for your friend. The onus should be on your friend and what she needs, and not on how you feel in that situation. She's there just like you, trying to help out, but yet you're making requirements of her to make you feel comfortable in the situation, and requiring her then, or couching it as she's not being civil. And I just question that a little bit, and I ask you to reflect on how fair is that she has to.
Okay, well, maybe somebody can help me with this later, because it seemed to me like this was Black respectability politics, but you're saying that it's not.
Of making white people feel more comfortable. That's where it originated, for safety. But in this situation, I don't think it's applicable, but it is some questions that we should bring up, or you should consider, and how you're relating to the situation and to your friend's friend.
Okay, well, if someone would be able to help me with this at a later time, I would appreciate it.
I absolutely volunteer to do that, Susan, and I will send you my number in the chat, because I would love to.
Thank you, Joval.
Yes, I would love to. It's going to take 2 minutes to explain it to you, and then, yeah.
Thank you.
All right. Wave your hand if you want to have a question or want to respond to one of the Q&A discussion points. Ellen.
Just remembering as a young child in central Georgia in the 50s and 60s, riding the train to Atlanta and being so fond of the Black conductors. And they were so nice to this little white girl. And I didn't understand at the time why they were so nice to this little white girl, why they had to be. The conductors had pretty good jobs and they didn't want to lose them. And so I understand their solicitousness now. And I don't feel really good about it, but I understand the concern about losing a good job.
So what you're saying, and you're recognizing the respectability politics that they had to play in upholding their job, is
Absolutely. Yeah.
Are there any people of color are on the line that want to raise some questions as well? I want to leave space for that as well.
I don't have well, maybe I do have a question because Susan and Ellen, who just spoke, I wonder if we have a shared understanding just on how we're defining Black respectability politics, because the questions that you're asking are very tangential at best to this conversation. And so I respectfully challenge if you heard what was said. And I say that in genuine love, care, compassion, all of that, which is why, Susan, I'm happy to have a conversation with you offline. Ellen, I heard you, but I can't help but wonder, are we operating with the same definition? Because it seems like we're not. And I think that, at least from what I understand of what was said, I think that's part of the problem.
So do you say it as Jovel? How do I pronounce your name? Sorry.
No, thank you for asking. It's Joval, as in
Joval, thank
Gallery.
you.
Yep, they're my
You
parents.
brought me to something that I was going to kind of close and end with, but I'm going to say it now. So thank you for presenting that way.
Love to help people transition. Yeah.
As we were trying to design the entire topic, we even debated about, should we just have this 13th be specifically just for Black people? And part of that is that we recognize that we have lived within the boundaries or are trying to work outside of the boundaries of Black respectability politics, we as Black people our entire lives. And that some of this is new information, new framing, even though white people also uphold it, right? And so that's why we also had different questions on here. What I want everybody to embrace and lean into is that, one, that this is recorded, so there's more learning that can happen afterwards if you miss something or you're not catching a thing, but also do not want us to spend our time in here trying to catch up white people, right? And so there are some things that I think you're bringing up good points. There are points in which even me, that I'm going to rewatch it and some things to learn on, right? But we do not want to center the time to catch up white people on the limits, the boundaries, the depth of Black respectability politics. So I appreciate that.
I have I guess it's a comment or an observation. When I first heard the topic and was listening to the definition in terms of how we adopt our behavior in order to please other folks, it reminded me of something some of my older relatives used to say when we were younger. They said, don't go outside and show your color. You know, in terms of don't, don't, be a credit to your race. Don't show your color, anything that could bring criticism to the rest of us through your behavior. And that's this term, that's what made me think about that. How we have adaptive behavior and conversation and things like that, because we were taught when we were young, we have to please certain people. So don't be yourself. Well, don't show your color. That's the term that was used.
That's so good on.
Part of the interesting part of preparing for today is just noticing what modern day terms are like of that. And so and others can just kind of shout out other ones like you doing too much. Oh, or you're extra. It's all along the same lines that there is a audience for which you need to curtail who you are in order to survive. Right?
And this also reminds me of, we didn't get too much into it in the slide, but the evolution in the way that Black respectability politics grows, right? And that still right now, even though I think it's a little bit different because hip hop has become mainstream, but hip hop being part of like thug behavior or violent behavior because of the lyrics, and but we could look back and go back to jazz and a lot of the same things were said about that. The same way that we talk about going back to the sexuality piece of the tenets. Back in the day, they would have called you a Jezebel, and that has been elevated to like a chicken head to a thought, right? All of these things that are the language of it. But what I appreciated that was one of the scholars that said, can't remember her name, that whatever it is that Black youth are using to creatively express themselves, it is always going to be policed. So no matter what time period it is, no matter what that thing is, it is always going to be policed and always going to be criticized.
I wanted to hop in on that because they made a video. This lady was talking about Lizzo and how people are calling her a mammy and all these different things. And it led to a really great conversation between my husband and myself because he was like, well, I just don't like all that twerk. And I was like, that's really interesting. You don't say that about them Cardi B videos you be watching. You don't say a mumbling word because I be looking at you and I know I be looking at you and you don't say nothing. But when it's Lizzo, you got something to say. So is it the twerking that's really bothering you, or is it because she's fat and she's putting her fat in your face and you don't like that? Right. And so when I think about these layers of respectability politics, and right, and even thinking about, yes, Cardi B gets a lot of backlash for what she does. But then if you add in, yes, Lizzo is darker and she's fat and she's unapologetic about it, about the layers that happen for us as Black women when we express our sexuality, because we can't be sexual as women, period, and definitely not sexual as Black women. And then you add in colorism, you add in weight, you add in all these things about how we show up and what we do with our bodies. And that's it.
Stephanie, I would add on to
Well,
that.
help me understand the criticism of Simone Biles when she first came on the scene and just performed perfectly, at the Olympics. But then there was this criticism about her hair. I mean, she did what she's a GOAT, greatest of all times now. But even when she first started, there wasn't applaud for what she did. It was attached to her edges, and I didn't. How was she supposed to look? Was it supposed that was she supposed to perform looking a certain way? I'm asking because
I just wanted to jump in just for a minute and kind of comment on what the lady who was just speaking about the values that we were raised with as baby boomers. And as this whole concept of respectability politics is really an intriguing subject. And I'm really glad that you presented it this evening. And as I'm listening, going back, I'm a baby boomer, born in the late 40s. And how can I say this? Excuse me?
What's your race?
What's my race?
Yes.
I'm a multi-ethnic genetic American, a descendant.
Here we go.
A descendant of West Africans and Europeans who developed this country. That's who I am. I'm a multi-ethnic, I'm a full-blooded American. So when you ask me who I am, I make a full statement of my collective. And I come from a generation of people who came from Negro to Black to African American, and I don't even know what our next label is going to be here. But what I wanted to say is that this whole thing around human values was raised tonight, and how we were raised as baby boomers. I can't pronounce her name. She's a beautiful name here. I don't want to mess it up. She spoke to this thing, parents telling kids, now don't go out here and show your color. My parents said, and my grandparents said, don't go out here and embarrass the family. It was about the family. And that was an American value. It just wasn't happening. And there was not just an expectation from kids my age who were African American, but also from Anglo kids and Italian kids and just Americans. It was the American way. You did not leave the house and act a fool in the street and embarrass your families. So my hope is that as we get into this conversation and you go deeper into it, that we're careful about careful that we don't push away those values that contribute to human excellence.
Well, there's no need for us
That
to
we
those values. Subscribing to those values is completely voluntary.
Well, okay, so I just said values, but I wasn't specific. So the way that you act away from the home, you know, I taught my kids that, who were probably your age. I taught them when you go out, there's a way that you
Dawn,
present
I'm
yourself.
going to interrupt
And
you,
that's
and I
just
think
and you know, that's just a point. I suppose, and I will wrap this up in like 10 seconds here, is that I'm just hoping that the values that promote community, the values that promote human excellence, that those things are not pushed aside, and that they are, you know, sort of they're acknowledged. That's basically what I'm saying, regardless of your race. And the other thing is, if you're not talking to the other side, how will they ever know what they're doing to you? If you're saying, well, we don't want to, to talk to the white
Terry,
people,
our time is running down. We need you to.
and to keep them out of the conversation, how will they ever know that it's a problem that they are, presenting to us?
Harry, I would submit
Terry,
for your consideration.
Can I? I'm so sorry.
Okay,
May I say something
1 second,
real quick?
everybody.
I'm
Everybody's
so
trying to jump
sorry.
in on this. So, first of all, I want to say is, Terry, because we need to isolate in our conversation on race, and because that was so ambiguous, it's hard for us to be able to jump in and talk into the intricacies of what you are saying right now, because race wasn't named close enough. So that is our first thing. Our second is that we can get into a whole conversation about all these things that are falling outside of the bounds of Black respectability politics, and talking about humanness and citizenship and all those things. That is a different conversation. So I want to say that before we move to our next thing, I'm going to ask Erica for you to chime in, and then we can do closeout time because we have about 4 minutes left.
One of the things that I wanted to say, and this is back to Stephanie's point, is that Black respectability politics is something that is how we're socialized to enter in this world. And I think that what it does, one of the things we have not talked about, is the disservice it does to kids to have to uphold and perform from a very young age. It inhibits their freedom, it clips their wings, because they're then performing for whatever, I don't want to say upholding the race and those kinds of things, but it is telling them that who they are is not good enough. And so I think it's important for us at some juncture, really soon, individually and collectively, to think about the utility of this and what the enduring legacies are of ascribing to a tool that doesn't allow us to lean into our full human nature.
And I saw just one more comment from a hand raise that we missed. That's for you, Adar.
Yes, thank you. During conversations like this, I'm always reminded how important it is to have an understanding of American history. And I really enjoyed this 13th of the month because it was grounded in American history. When we talk about family and family values, using that phrase as if that has ever been a value of American history is debunked by just a precursory understanding or reading of American history. From the enslavement and selling of children from their parents, from snatching children from the home of natives to have them become, to take the Indian from the child was the phrase. When we look at our budget today and see Congress fighting so hard not to give people the money and the resources that is needed for families, there is no way that we can talk about family being an American value. And I would urge each of us who has taken the time to participate tonight to just go and to to do what this forum has done, which is to ground our responses and our assumptions, to test them with American history, because that tells us whether our assumptions are grounded in truth or grounded in programming or grounded in lies. Thank you for allowing me the time.
Thank you. I'll do my close out reflection and then I'll pass it to you, Erica, to close it out on what I'm leaving with in this conversation. And we started our conversation by uplifting our ancestors and extending grace. And so what I'm leaving with is the strategies that were given to me from my ancestors, my grandparents, my parents, and honoring those strategies, and also recognizing that I cannot take on the entire weight of all of that, right? That me as Anthony in 2021, that I have to develop a different, like some new strategies because the times have changed, and I also have to take some of these, but there are some that are just outdated that I do not need to carry with me anymore. I give the story often about my grandmother who will not go to bed without washing her dishes. And that goes back to, she said, when we grew up, if you did not wash your dishes, we always wash our dishes because we were worried something would happen at night. And if a doctor came to your house and needed to and saw that your house was dirty in a Black household, they would just say it's dirty and that's why you all are sick, right? That's a strategy that they needed then. Times have changed now. I go to the doctor's office or to a hospital, right? And so I can let that go. And so what I want to encourage for the Black people that are on here, what strategies can you let go? Because we have to adapt and grab on to new ones into 2021. And there's some that we have to let go of. How about you, Erica?
I think it's interesting that you talk about health in that regard, because I think that that's one section that we didn't get to touch of. And so I think my closing statements are around continuing to examine the different domains of your life and where this shows up. And so with any tool, like if I have like a hammer that's broken, I don't continue to use that one because it's not fit for the job at hand. At the same time, if there's another job that has the same thing over and over again, that broken hammer to hit, I'm going to use that then. And so I think it's about having a toolbox of things you use. Du Bois called it about double consciousness. And we talked about that a little bit in the slides today, and knowing when to where to use it, but not be so attached to a tool that we use for our survival that it becomes synonymous with our identity. And that it keeps us from really interrogating the white supremacist culture that we live in. We can't afford that.
On November, we will be talking about the emancipation process here in Maryland, kind of like a Juneteenth, but here in Maryland, about some of that history that happened here. The slaves in Maryland were actually freed in November of 1864. So that will actually be the 157th anniversary. We're going to be talking about the free Black community here in Baltimore. I'm going to use free in quotes actually, because though people were free, but they weren't really free because of the different laws that were enacted here in this country. So that will be a discussion that we will be having on November 13th.
So then thank you all for your time today. And with that, we'll say good night and see you on the 13th of November.
Thanks everyone for joining us.